Bern, it seems like for the last several weeks we've kind of been tiptoeing around a topic that I know several of our viewers have written and called and requested that maybe we get right to the heart of the matter, and that topic is selling and the art of being a salesperson. We've talked about multi-level marketing. We had Rick Walker on the show a few weeks back, and he asked about some selling techniques, why people are successful, why people aren't, what's the difference between being a salesperson and a manager. But it seems like this is such an important and relevant topic. I was looking through an issue of the local paper a few weeks back, and it said that they predict over the next 15 years one of the strongest areas for growth in the market, job security, new jobs being created, is in the sales field. And I think that obviously as long as there are goods and services, there will be salespeople.
That's in concert too with a prophecy of the gurus of the business world, that the time is rapidly coming when people won't have jobs per se, but I think we've mentioned before will be portfolio people. Those will have 2 or 3 marketable skills, and indeed will have to sell themselves into independent contracts and consulting contracts. And if they're not prepared to do that, they got a difficulty. Just a few days ago, for example, I was talking to a young chiropractor who had devoted 6 years of his life to studying that profession, and very quickly realized that if he was going to succeed and build a practice, he was going to have to get into selling. Artists out here, fine artists, being able to paint fine portraits and pictures, realize that if they're going to make a living, they're going to have to go selling. The other day, I went over to something like a Job Corps, and there was 30 or 40 people there working with computers and resumes and what have you, trying to find a job. And so they had a little assembly, and I went to visit with them, and I stood in front and I said, it's a real pleasure to be able to come and confront a group of salespeople. And they looked shocked, and I said, oh, you mean you're not? Well, you'd better be. Because what you're going to have to do is to go out through the process and to sell yourselves and your services, and if you can't or you won't, you may go without. And that's the way it's getting, and that's part of the stress, by the way, that people feel. The banking industry is in turmoil. In other words, a lot of people went into banking to be bankers, to be tellers and what have you, and the banking industry realizes they have to sell their goods and services and their products, and if they don't, they're under a huge amount of stress. And because there's not a lot of capable sales management, they don't have that background, then they're doing it inappropriately, putting undue stress on people, and it's really a difficult industry. And so it goes, I mean, throughout the country. And yes, it is an important subject, and I know sometimes people say, oh boy, selling, that's not for me, and they go to change the channel. And I'd say don't do that. Don't do that, because in one form or another, we're all in sales. We have to sell ourselves, we have to sell our children, on being appropriate. But really what we're talking about today is what might be considered the profession of selling. Obviously, I do a series of essays, and one of them is the psychology of being in sales. And usually when I start the session, I say, now there is a mistake on your workbook. I'd like to have you cross off the word sales and put the word selling. Now the reason I do that is that in 37, 38 years, having worked with tens of thousands of people in this field, I have never known anyone who didn't excel, succeed, thrive in selling. Never. Isn't that fascinating? It's success assured, failure proof.
What makes the difference, Bern?
Okay, sales is the industry. You know what I mean? That's an adjective that describes an industry that's fraught with failure and fruitlessness. Okay, and selling is an activity. It's a verb that defines action, involvement, that always creates results, and it doesn't seem to matter what the product is. Now that may be fortunate or unfortunate, but it is true.
So you're saying sales is a passive term and selling is an active?
Exactly, and so we talk about the psychology of being in selling. Now, one of the things we have to address from the very beginning is that a lot of people are hiding out here. You know what I mean? There was a cartoon I saw in the paper someday, and I don't know if we can see this on TV or not, but I can describe it. There's a fellow here digging and sweating and toiling, and he's grousing, and he's saying, well, it just ain't fair making me dig salt in your mines. And the lieutenant, the man in charge says, okay, from now on then, you're a sodium chloride extractor. And he said, well, that's more like it. And he's happy, he's happy with it. Now what I'm up to there is the fact that The tragedy is that a lot of people are in selling who are trying to deny it. You know, we have consultants and agents and representatives and vice presidents. You know, there are some brokerages out here, you know, stock brokerages have 200 vice presidents because they're all vice presidents in charge of sales. And so rather than calling it what it is, they're trying to avoid and trying to convey some other message. And that's not good for their heart. You know what I mean? I think it's time to really address the fact that it's a noble profession. You know, we have to understand that this nation became as great as it has been, and frankly still is, because of its salespeople.
Yes.
In other words, a lot of people don't realize that if you come out with a new law, an ordinance that prohibited all sales activity in this country, no more door-to-door, no more store-to-store, no more office-to-office sales, no more people calling on the phone, no more people sending out, you know, bits of information, you got to stop that. If somebody wants something, they'll just go buy it. Okay? You hear that feeling? What would happen to our economy?
Well,
I'm talking crater.
A lot of times people don't know what they want if they're not educated. But as you were saying that, I guess I had another thought. I was thinking that we wouldn't even have a country if the founding fathers hadn't been great salesmen.
Exactly.
If you think of the stirring words of Patrick Henry and the list, Benjamin Franklin's pleas, and the list goes on and on and on. They were great
Years ago,
sales.
Zig Ziglar defined himself nationally by writing an article about Christopher Columbus and what a great salesperson he was.
Absolutely.
And that article was published in the Constitutional Journal, I think they put out at Congress, and it gave him a lot of recognition. But it was about the job that Christopher Columbus had to do in order to sell the Queen and what have you, and all these guys to get on that ship and to sail out, and they didn't know where they were going. I mean, that's salesmanship in the purest form, and yet productive, you know. And so I think a lot of it is recognizing our heritage, our history of selling, and to recognize that some things just require selling. It's really fascinating. One of the, I got into selling back in 1955, and right around that time, Sears and Roebuck decided that they were not in one of the great businesses on this planet, and that was the encyclopedia business. And that's a billion-dollar market, and they weren't getting any of it. And so they decided to create and to develop, and did, a fine set of encyclopedia called the American Peoples. And they put it in all their catalogs internationally, and all the stores had a little displays of living room setting with the bookshelf and a book lying open on the coffee table and what have you. And do you have any idea how many sets of encyclopedia they sold their first year? 18 sets of books. They were out of their gourd. You know, how in the world? Because the average college kid going door to door during the summer will sell that many per month.
Yes.
Just one, you know.
One student.
One student. So they said, my goodness. And so what they did, they began to create a direct sales force. They were actually recruiting salespeople to sell American Peoples door to door. And you can imagine, it was like a rollover, because you knock on the door, and the lady says, answers and says, yes, may I help you? And you say, yes, I'm with Sears and Roebuck. I understand you bought a refrigerator 3 months ago, and we'd like to come in and do a service call, and while we're here, show you a new product that's not in the store. And it was, you know, it was a walk-in. So they'd lay out their materials. They already knew they had the credit. And so these book salesmen that they were proselytizing from other book companies were making a killing. Well, they were frustrated by that. They didn't know how to handle these, you know, assertive, aggressive type people, and so they just shut her down. They just shut it down completely, sold the plates to Grolier's Encyclopedia, and they're still selling American Peoples. It was a good book, too. It was the first encyclopedia that had the plastic overlays that showed the bones and the muscular structure.
I think we have a set of those at home.
I wouldn't be surprised. Fine set of books. But see, it took a direct salesperson to sell it, offering the premium, creating the need through communication and education. There are some things that require that. It's kind of like, you know, the Bible has always been the bestseller. You know, year in and year out, the Bible is the best-selling book. And partly the reason for that is that there is a company in Tennessee that every summer recruits hundreds, I mean hundreds of college students, and sends them out all across the country at these little hamlets and towns, going door to door selling Bibles. And they do an incredible job. Some of those kids will make $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 during the summer selling Bibles. And it's a challenging thing, too, because they leave them all by themselves out there. And then they go back and pick them up in the fall. And they just have to fend for themselves during the summer. Just incredible. And yet, I can remember I believe it was in 1959. I had just finished a stint with Cutco Cutlery, and I was kind of looking around for another experience in my research, you know, and I happened to notice an ad in the paper was full of brush. And I went to work for them, and I couldn't figure out how in the world they could make a living selling a $3.45 item. That was the average size sale nationally.
Yes.
And how do you make a living doing that? Well, I found out very quickly you have to make a lot of sales every day, okay? And in order to do that, you got to make a lot of calls. And in order to succeed there, the average fuller brush man in America was presenting himself to 55 homemakers a day, every single day.
Oh my goodness.
That's a lot of calls.
That's a lot of calls.
And if you put on 30, you wouldn't make it. You'd do 55. Well, I made a commitment to them. I was going to do 70. I wasn't going to be average. And I managed it, but boy, I'll tell you, I had a lot of adjusting to do, and I'll get into that someday. But while I was with Fuller, I became aware of the value of sales in this sense. I remember we had a room deodorizer. It was an air freshener. It was, I believe, it was a 6-ounce can for $1.89. Okay? Now, that was back in 1959. Now, how in the world could that compete with the retail product that's on the store shelf with a 24-ounce can, okay, that was selling for 99 cents?
Right.
So it's illogical that you could compete favorably. However, I sold these by the crates because what I would do, I'd knock on the door and I'd give away a vegetable brush and a pastry brush and a comb, you know, and I would say, I'd like to give you home a beauty treatment. And they would say, okay, and I'd go in and I would pull out the little cans about that big, and I would walk to the middle of the room and squirt to the floor a metered spray. It would go like that, and it was a lighter-than-air chemical amine that would rise with the heat of the natural heat of the room and actually dispel or disseminate the molecular structure of an odor and actually destroy the odor and leave a very, very hardly, you know, noticeable fragrance in the air. A guaranteed one-year supply. It had a little place on it where you could write the delivery date, and if they ran out within a year, we'd give them a brand new can. That's how we competed. You know what I mean? By educating the fact that there was a product that had a value, but this would never have sold on the counter. And so it took someone out there in the world. Another interesting part of our heritage. I bet you don't remember this, but I do. There was a time when they came out with canned food. Can you believe it? I mean, food in cans. And everybody thought...
We're supposed to eat that stuff?
Yeah, everybody thought, this is a great idea. And they were buying them, and they would take them home, and they had a problem. How do you get the can open? You know what I mean? In other words, and they were using kitchen knives and pickaxes and all kinds of stuff. And, I mean, no one thought about a can opener. See, that's not the way it works. But one man in New Hampshire invented the first can opener. It's the kind that you prod and you do this with it. You see? And, I mean, he had a warehouse full of them, and he couldn't sell them because the wholesalers and the retailers wouldn't market them. See, there was no call for can openers. No one was asking for them. It's kind of irrational when you think about it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so what he did, he had some cans made, little cans, and he would go door to door showing the homemakers how it worked and was selling these things like crazy. And so could have been one of the first franchises. He put ads in all across the country and said, you know, make a living selling can openers, and people would buy a supply of them in these cans for demonstration purposes, and they were selling cans like crazy. Well, sooner or later, those can openers would dull or they would break. And so these people didn't know where to go to get a can opener, so they'd go to the store and they said, yeah, don't you guys carry can openers? And it created what we now call a legitimate market. Follow what I'm saying? But the initial selling job had to be done one-on-one by an enthusiastic person, probably who had a dream. Okay. The other thing I remember was, I remember the day. So I'm just mature enough. I won't say old, mature enough to remember the day that a fellow knocked on our door in Whitensville, Massachusetts. And he had a box, okay? He had a box, and it had a round tube-like thing in it, and it was called a television. He encouraged my father to keep it in his home for a week and to watch it, and they would come back in a week and pick it up, okay? So during that week, you can imagine, our home became a theater. You know, the neighbors, the relatives were coming in to watch television. It was really kind of fun, and that
How many
elevated my
channels
den.
were there?
Oh, I don't, probably 1, 2, you know. And then they came back and wanted to take it, and there's no way they could get it. You know what I mean? I guess they call it the puppy dog clothes. You let the guy use it, and he can't do without it. And so that's the way that worked.
The neighbors would disown you.
Yeah. Anything can be sold direct to the home, to the consumer. Now, it takes a sort of a re-preparation to do that. You know, because we've been conditioned against it. But the fact remains that it still is, has been, and probably will remain the last frontier of the free enterprise system. The last place where an individual, say an individual regardless of sex or age, I mean, you can be 17, 16, 14, or you can be 90, okay? Regardless of color, or regardless of creed or educational background, if you can recapture or you actually manage to possess your initiative, and you can go out there and encounter people, anyway, we'll get to that, that you could build an empire, particularly if you're prepared to teach others what you have learned in the experience. That seems to be the key. And so in the psychology of being and selling, we just have to understand that there is a nobility to it. There is a nobility. Now, occasionally some products will find their way into the marketplace, like the can opener, and well, the encyclopedia still hasn't. They still have to sell those. There's a Funk and Wagnall, I believe, encyclopedia that's sold in grocery stores, and they've never done well.
Well, now it's all on CD.
Oh, I know. And now you got to go out and sell that darn thing.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a little easier to carry it around in your backpack, though.
That's right. I think, too, it's one of the things that some of the techniques that we'll be talking about will be applicable not only to the creative direct selling experience, including real estate and insurance and copy machines and what have you, but to the ever-increasing multi-level industry. Now, they say that's not a selling business, and it isn't. I mean, you really don't have to sell the product, but you got to do one heck of a selling job on individuals. I mean, I find that in multi-level and network marketing, you got to sell people on themselves. You got to remind them of their authority and their capacities and to recondition them so that they can do the job, to re-perceive themselves in that relationship to what they're doing in order to be successful. So it's still a selling business.
Well, there's still a fair amount of promotion. I mean, they're usually, if it's only that they're using it for themselves, a product or a service, and none of those organizations will thrive unless people are actually using the product or service that they're promoting or that it's based on.
That's one thing about selling. People say, well, I just couldn't sell anything. And that's not true, nor is it fair to even consider that. People should not disqualify themselves from this. Now, I will admit...
we sell things every day.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to our neighbors.
Now, I'm pretty flippant about this right now, but let me explain. This whole thing started for me in 1955. I was in the Navy and they lost my pay records. I don't know if I've talked about this on the show or not, but they lost my pay records, and most people don't realize it, but if the military loses your pay records, they don't pay you. And boy, I was in deep trouble. I had a couple of babies to feed, and I wasn't getting any money from the Navy, borrowing some from Navy Relief. So I started looking for a part-time job, and these ads that say earn an extra $1,000 a month part-time without interfering with your regular job. I didn't know in my naivete, but every one of them was sales jobs. You know, cookware and encyclopedia and crystal and china and siding and one thing and another. And I kept walking away because I stuttered, I was introverted, I was not prepared to do it, and I knew it. And just by chance, one day someone knocked on my door and was selling a kitchen knife line. I fell in love and with the cutlery, and knew somehow that would sell, and that started a career. And it was incredibly difficult. So I'm not being flippant about it. I do think everyone has the capacity to do it, but they don't have the ability. So what they have to do is to apply themselves. In other words, they have to exercise those capacities and practice them and test them, and gradually through practice develop the abilities. And once you have the ability, you've got a whole new career. Gina, I haven't punched a clock, haven't worked for anybody, haven't been accountable really to anyone else since 1957 when I finally left the military. And I would want that for anybody. You know what I mean? In other words, it's been and the thing of it is, I'm confident that you've heard the story before perhaps, where I could jump out of a parachute or be pushed out of a plane. I wouldn't jump voluntarily, but I could be pushed out of a plane with a parachute, land anywhere in the free world, anywhere where there's commerce, in the whole world, and be engaged within an hour or two. I mean, I could go and be engaged right away. I know, for example, from this very spot right here, if I lost the right to do what I'm doing now, there's some voice from out of some place said, Moses, you can't do that anymore. Find something else. You know, I know that within a mile of this spot, wherever I am, okay, wherever I am, within a mile, I could find 100 places where I could become gainfully engaged. And that's a sense of security.
Yes.
To know that you can do that. I know you're in sales, and I have a sense that you're doing well. But do you think you might do better?
Absolutely. I think there's always room for improvement.
Isn't that something? It's something about sales. There's room for growth, for growth, for growth. And frankly, a lot of people don't understand. They get so concentrated on what they're doing and trying to accomplish that they forget the real secret, and that is personal development. In other words, the superstars I have known have focused on their own capacities and abilities, examining themselves, why they feel, why they do, you know what I mean, and working on that, and gradually through that personal growth become accomplished.
I think one of the things that's nice and especially obvious to an individual in selling is they realize that they are responsible for their success or failure.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's so easy in a typical kind of job where you punch a clock to blame everything that goes wrong on the boss or your coworkers or the product or anything else. But it's, in selling, you know that if you don't make the call, you're not going to even have a chance at the sale. And so when the responsibility rests on your shoulders, with responsibility comes freedom.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
If it's exercised, right.
Yes.
You know, I know one thing, that if people get into it and are not conditioned, trained, coached properly, oftentimes are not prepared, and they will falter, and they'll fail, and they will shame the dream. Because they really don't recognize that it's them that was inept. It was them that was not prepared, and then start and develop that. And I think that's a tragedy, because I think a lot of people say, oh yeah, I tried selling once and that's not for me. Well, that's not fair. Because if anybody does it, you know what I mean, anybody does it, that individual can, but there has to be some application. And what we're going to do, I know the show is waning. You know, I mean, we're running out of time.
Are we really?
Yeah, I can't believe it. But what we'll do in the next week or two or three or four, begin to talk about some concepts that are really quite different. You know, I am a praxeologist, and I take kind of an obtuse view on a lot of things. And I do think that the selling profession, the industry, has stomped on its own feet sometimes in its languaging, in its perspectives, and the things that they teach and expect out of people. And so we're going to kind of examine that pretty carefully and see if we can't reperceive it and make it more acceptable, easier, more doable. And I'm confident. Now, I can speak with some confidence because I've had literally tens of thousands of young salespeople in my life who have moved forward, some who have been incredibly successful, and no one who didn't leave better than whence they came. So some of the material that we're going to go into, I'm very confident can make a difference, okay, and can accelerate. Now, in the last few years, right here in this city, we've had people have magic breakthroughs. I mean, from anywhere from 2 to 3 and 400% increase in their sales utilizing some of this material. Now, I'm not talking that they weren't doing anything. You know, 100% of nothing, you know, still nothing.
Right.
I'm talking about people who were substantial already, who made giant moves forward. Not always, but just enough to know that the material can accomplish that if you integrate it. And I would say that if people see things that they want to grasp, know that they can call in and 1-800-661-3490, and we'll make an effort to send them at least an audio cassette of the show and invite them to perhaps some live performances so that they can really get some of these techniques and move forward with their lives and their careers. One reason it's worth it. There is a stability in sales if there is security in sales, if there is stability. That means doing essentially the same thing day in and day out like you would at any task or any job. And that in that stability, in order to have it, you must have statistics. And that's the direction that we're going to be heading. But you've got to kind of run it like a business. You can't play with it. You'll lose the game. It's not a game. It's a business, a profession, a job, and we'll discuss some of that in detail. Do you have anything that you would like to look forward to next week, or anything you want to
Well, actually, I am really enjoying this topic. As you mentioned, I'm in sales as well, and it's one thing that I think you said people try it once and then they're discouraged. And there's I'll paraphrase a quote that I always liked: when you persist in doing something, you become successful at it. Not because the nature of the thing has changed, because your ability to do has increased.
We can't change the size of the mountain, but we can grow.